the reason why, for me, the fusion of sort of behavioural science and procurement was so important was because that blend of, I'll call it, social sciences and effectively, if you like, in a sense, the economic sciences of procurement, is that balancing factor. It's the recognition that, yes, we can have processes and systems, we can have tools and techniques, going all the way back to Kralich and many others probably before.
Yeah.
But the behavioural science piece is really there as a counterbalance that says, please recognise that each individual has over 200 cognitive biases, has the big 5 personality traits, and by the way, their heuristics, in other words, their life experiences, are all used in interpretation, decision-making, understanding, etc., etc. So the reality is, if you multiply all those numbers together, actually you end up at infinity.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a stronger supply chain and procurement for companies running SAP. Today we have the absolute pleasure being joined by Professor David Loseby. And Professor Loseby is a disruptor, an innovator, an author, and he was part of the OG of e-auctions and training and e-marketing, and he ended up coming through procurement, being a CPO, and getting a PhD in behavioral science. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome, Sean. Very welcome. And yes, hopefully I can share a few insights and war stories along the way. Hopefully people find either endearing or helpful.
Hopefully both, and hopefully funny too. I love the sense of behavioral science and how that I've also always loved economics and behavioral economic incentives and how those work. It brings to mind a great question around what exactly are we trying to do with income tax as opposed to cigarette tax. But that for another day. But when I think about behavioral science and then the topics around critical thinking and around the underlying mechanics of human behavior and some of the most important concepts in behavioral science, there's that calm being. I was hoping you could share more about.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, for many people, they'll just think that COMB is another acronym that's been added to an ever-ending list of acronyms that come into the profession. But to explain, COMB was originally devised actually in the healthcare sector. So it stands for capability, opportunity, and motivation, which are, if you like, the essential drivers of behavior. And one of the things, as you say, in terms of economics, unfortunately, as originally conceived, talks about really rationality and logic and the fact that certain profiles or demographics will always, if you like, vote a particular way, spend their money a particular way, whatever. The reality of behavioral economics says, actually, no, that's not the case, because we recognize that behaviors in particular are a huge component. And the reason why, for me, the fusion of sort of behavioral science and procurement was so important was because that blend of, I'll call it, social sciences and effectively, if you like, in a sense, the economic sciences of procurement, is that balancing factor. It's the recognition that, yes, we can have processes and systems, we can have tools and techniques, going all the way back to Kralich and many others probably before.
Yeah.
But the behavioral science piece is really there as a counterbalance that says, please recognize that each individual has over 200 cognitive biases, has the big 5 personality traits, and by the way, their heuristics, in other words, their life experiences, are all used in interpretation, decision-making, understanding, etc., etc. So the reality is, if you multiply all those numbers together, actually you end up at infinity. So the reality is, no two people are exactly the same. So if you treat them exactly the same, then it's unlikely that you're going to get that connection. And that's where I think the issue is, in terms of saying, let's just take a logical, rational approach and let's just worry about putting some technology in, because that's all we need to do. That's probably the mistake number one right at the outset. So And so many people actually, oddly enough, fail at that gate, which is quite sad, really, in a way.
It's almost a perfect reflection of the Dunning-Kruger effect of
Oh, yes.
believing for some reason that, oh, we'll just slap this thing in here. And you might believe that the first 2 or 3 times, but, hopefully not fooled a third time. I love that sense of treating people the same as a fallacy because humans are not machines. And based on the canoe or the ocean model, or based on the various biases at play and their own beliefs, because those experiences and their beliefs, somebody with a bit of a victim mindset is going to respond so horrifically differently as opposed to somebody who's going to make it what they're going to make it, and they're going to take it by the horns and go do it. But when we think about that motivation side of things in particular, even if the capability was similar and the opportunity is presented equally, that motivation factor is so fundamentally important. And how recognition, as recognition of that difference, but also in the way that we recognize performance, is so critical. How would you imagine, and I tend to think of this in the context of like love languages, where, my wife does not appreciate it if I buy her flowers. And this is maybe confusing to some other people, but if we think about love languages and how we can apply some of those concepts into recognizing people in our teams, how would you encourage people to think about that?
I think there are many different ways of thinking about that. I mean, the ones that sort of stick in my mind is the recognition that, and the example actually I'll pull out of that is to say, I've got twin boys, and the fact that they're twin boys is probably where the similarity ends, because their motivations for doing things completely different. And one is motivated by money, the other one is motivated by, I'll call it sort of recognition for what he may do, or what he may say. And so the motivational factors are exactly the same in the business context. And like I've said to many people, you don't have to think about the incentive mechanisms always have to be fiscal incentive mechanisms. And so for me, recognizing, and in fact, this goes back to something that a CEO said to me many years ago, and I loved it for it because it was one of the things that really stuck in my mind, which was always remember that the little things make the biggest impact. And I thought, what does she mean by that? And it wasn't until like several years later that the penny completely dropped. And I recognized that doing some small things or little things for people, and the example I gave, recently to somebody was to say, well, actually, you could give somebody a whatever value Amazon gift voucher for completing something, completing a survey or doing something or whatever it happens to be. But actually, as a CPO, getting up from your desk early in the morning before they come in and sticking a post-it note on somebody's desk that says, great job, thanks for doing X, Y, Z, realize you stayed late, hope it didn't end well, big smiley face and my name on the bottom, went way more than giving somebody, a pay rise or a bonus or whatever. Yes, you have to pay for the things that deserve that fiscal recognition, like doing extra hours or working on a holiday or something like that. Absolutely. But the motivations for different people for doing things will be very, very different, even to the extent whereby, I mean, you gave the example of your wife wouldn't appreciate flowers. Somebody might not appreciate you sending them on a training course. They probably think, I've done this 3 times already. Why do I want to do it again?
I
Give me
don't
some.
want to go to a conference.
Oh my
I'm an
God,
introvert.
don't make me. I don't like these things. How can I do it a different way? And you go, right, okay, I'll listen to that. And actually, what we'll do is we'll do this online course. And because I recognise that this might be part and parcel of the discussion, which is and again, creating that psychological safety to do that, which says, you know what, I'm dyslexic, so could I watch a video, or could I do it this way, and just understanding those things that are so important to somebody and creating that psychological safety, but also at the same time, understand what's going to be impactful for them, understand how they're going to learn, because there are different pedagogies for different people, and there's different ways of delivering those messages and that information. So
Yep.
understand that and don't do the sheep dip treatment, which is everybody gets exactly the same. No, we're not all built the same, so don't give us all the same stuff. And I suppose that's about the recognition that you have to invest in that understanding. As a big corporate, people go, oh, I've got, as Rolls-Royce, 1,000 people in the function, whatever. Okay, great. But, you know, it's a bit like a menu. We're going to have to devise a number of different things. Not everybody gets, meat and two potatoes sort of thing. It doesn't work that way. You're going to have to think about different things that you can give to different people, give them options. And then that way, then they feel that it's fair, they've been listened to. And that's all part and parcel of the behavioural science piece, which is even though they may not get exactly what they want, at least if you've listened to them, explored options, and then landed on some solutions, they believe then that the system of fairness has dealt the right card and allowed them to make some choices. And that's hugely important.
So much about who you are recognizing and empathizing with them enough to recognize them in the way that they value, as
Yeah.
opposed to, I think the simpler, easier way is, oh, I'd appreciate a gift card, as opposed to somebody else going, I don't want one. That doesn't do it for me. Where's my handwritten Post-it note?
Yeah.
That, I think, is a beautiful reminder for all of us, for leading teams or as a husband or wife or father or mother, for the people that we know and love and care about, and recognizing that it's up to us to more deeply understand what they value and how they want to be treated. I think that CEO that you spoke with years ago, and that wonderful bit of advice of the little things, those little things also really shine in the products that we use, the software products, the physical products, and in the way people are treated. And we talked about the way people are treated. Maybe you can share an example or two of your favorite examples in a product, software or physical, that stand out to you as a really thoughtful example of something that made a big difference, or took it just that little bit further that made a really big difference in how valuable or memorable or effective the experience was.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm not a big advocate of huge customization, but I am an advocate, obviously, of personalization. And so, therefore, getting the nuances of that right. So, understanding that, somebody's log on screen might look a bit different to somebody else's. And that's an easy thing to do in terms of a background or, whatever it happens to be. That sort of engagement and that understanding that one person values something different to another is there. And I think other things that for me I recognise had a big value, and particularly this was for users that had infrequent use of systems. So they might be approvers, they might download a report once a month, whatever it had to be. But having at point of use tutorials that said click button, whatever, and after that you'll see this, and then it'll scroll across and show you this, and all those little things that are actually in the system rather than some manual you've got to go find. I mean, one of the things that we have in behavioral science, we talk about frictionless. In other words, remove the resistance. So the more you can do to remove the resistance, which is don't make it difficult for somebody, like single sign-on. Single sign-on was a revelation years ago, excuse me. But the reality is that the pain in the backside of having to sign on to multiple systems back in the days gone by was actually a huge turn on. And excuse me, for people like me that had to go into multiple systems, having to log into multiple systems with different passwords and they were encrypted different ways, boy, that made life painful. So the more we can do to sort of remove that friction, as I call it. So anything that causes somebody to go outside the system, go somewhere else, go find something, go and bring something back, that's friction. So anything that can be done to remove that friction is a plus.
100% with you. I viscerally remember the first time I had to sign into SAP to do my timesheet. First, I had to sign into the computer. Then I had to go sign into SAP. And then it still had the gall to ask me my employee number. Like, you'd think you'd have figured this out by now.
Yeah.
And this kind of idea just blows my mind that was a standard expected level of experience. And because there's so many friction points through it. And I think as leaders, for us to lean hard into your advice and say, what friction is in the way of our preferred way of doing things, and what needs to be true to make the way we roll out a solution the path of least resistance, to remove the friction from the way we want it done. And that's a different question from how do we make sure that everybody is complying to policy and da 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 da. And if the preferred way to do it is that you are following the policy, then that capability and opportunity may be equal and may be very highly capable people. And the opportunity to go and do it the right way may be universal. But the motivation to go and learn another tool, another system, like, do I have to study the policy to have to follow it? Or can it be so easy? And today it can be, where you don't need to learn the policy or the system or the tool. It just goes.
Just making things as easy as the perpetual novice never needs to relearn a new policy, a new system, or a new tool, making that work for them where they are working. I guess as a last thought, David, if you can help share something that if somebody is watching this and you hope they remember this 6 weeks later to be, a better leader, better disruptor, better innovator, what would you want them to remember?
I think the main things for me is to recognize that every single person on this planet, to some degree or other, will see the world a different way, interpret it a different way, understand the communication a different way, make decisions based on different attributes, all those kind of things. So your assumption and your understanding of the world is likely to be different to the person you're engaging with, talking to, communicating with. Your job is to figure out where their compass is at, not where your compass is at, where their compass is at. And that's the age-old trick that for me, in a sense, is so, so important. It's not about you, it's about them. And so, despite the fact you may be the leader, that doesn't cut it. What you have to think about is, where are they at? What's important to them? Do they feel comfortable in this space? There are so many times, particularly in digital transformations, where nobody's going to stick their hand up and go, oh, actually, I don't even have a computer. Don't assume I know how to press these buttons because I don't have one of these things. And I've had instances like that. So I think you have to start from the 0-0 coordinates and work away from there, because to make some assumptions could be one of the most, how can I put it, basic errors that you then make for that particular person. And so I think you have to invest in the people. You have to invest in understanding them. It's not about you, it's about them. Think of it that way, and then you'll make a reasonable start of it.
I love that. What would need to be true for us to really understand the person that we're trying to help? David, thank you so much for joining us today. And for everybody here, thank you for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement for companies running SAP. See you again next week. Thanks, everyone.